Good evening to all of you, and I welcome to you for Race. Okay. Good evening, all of you, and I welcome to Race 2020 event. Now we have a session on building the platform for digital nomads. Digital nomads are basically people who often are conceived to be working remotely from foreign countries like coffee shops, public libraries, etc., and are supposed to use latest emerging technologies to earn their living and more generally conduct their life in a nomadic manner. As individual and companies are trying to understand what AI can do for people, but these digital nomads are already using these AI technologies like chatbots, machine learnings, and taking full advantage of it. It is also very pertinent to create an environment where informal economy workers and digital nomads can thrive. Through today's session, we can seek to explore, are digital nomads already here? How will AI-based technologies create and streamline the world of digital nomads? What are the other infrastructure is required to facilitate digital nomads? I now welcome all the esteemed speaker to this panel. I also welcome the audience who have gathered virtually in large numbers to listen to this distinguished panel discussion. Today we have Professor Raj Reddy, who is a Turing Awardee and Padma Bhushan Awardee, former co-chair US President Information Technology Advisory Committee, here with us, who has also been a pioneer to first system here, I say. Professor Raj Reddy is also known for his work in continuous speech recognition, robotics, human-computer interaction, and other field applied AI intelligence for demonstration of technology significance of AI. We also have Dr. Abhay Karandikar, who is an Indian educator, engineer, advisor, best known for his work in telecommunications sector in India. Currently, he is serving as director of Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. Prior to that, Dr. Karandikar has held the position including Dean, Indian Institute Chair in the Department of Electrical Engineering, IIT Mumbai, Center for Advanced Computing, and TSTI. After him, we have Mr. Dr. Amit Pandey, who is a president, the chief CTO, and chief science officer at Hanson Robotics, the creator of world's most advanced human-like experience humanoid robot called Sophia. Earlier, he has also served as head principal scientist at SoftBank Robotics Europe, who have been mass-produced humanoid robot paper. After that, we have Dr. Charru Malhotra, who is presently working as Associate Professor E-Governance and ICT at Indian Institute of Public Administration, New Delhi. She has more than 28 years of experience in the field of software engineering, ICT, MIS, GIS, and e-governance. We also have Dr. Shantanu Bhattacharya, who is a chief data scientist Airtel X Lab. Currently, he's leading and data-driven growth and transformation for Airtel 3.0. He has also led Facebook's emerging market products with 350 million users and 2 billion revenue. He has also headed America Online AOL Global Data Analytics and Products. Has also built 2 startups and been a part of the journey of one of the startup delivery unicorn status. We have Mr. Saurabh Mellera, AI Enterprise Architecture, Global Public Sector Education and Research in Oracle. He has architected IT solutions for over 25 years, maximizing internal investment and strategies. Saul has also served in various IT leadership roles such as Chief Technology Officer, Chief Operating Officer, Chief Architect in domains such as public utilities, government, and healthcare. We have Dr. Saurabh Mishra, who is founder and CEO of Tayo. He is an economist, reliability engineer, and machine learning scientist. His expertise focuses on scalable artificial intelligence to aid complex investment decisions. With this, I invite Professor Raj Reddy to deliver his keynote address for the session.
So you can unmute. Can you just unmute?
Okay. Can you see my screen? At this point, it says, stop sharing.
Yes, we can see the screen.
Thank you. That's all I'm looking for, some reference. So my topic is telerobotics for disaster rescue. Namely, this is in the theme of the whole conference on AI in service of society. I think we should spend a substantial amount of time thinking about and planning for how this technology can help disasters that happen. Disasters have this property that they're unplanned and unpredictable, and when they happen, we need to know. So we have been talking about the concept of intelligent agents, assistants, that would permit us to help us to deal with unpredictable situations. We call them guardian angels. A guardian angel is a personal, enduring, autonomic, intelligent agent that discovers and warns you about unanticipated events that could impact your safety, security, and happiness. And this includes just-in-time warnings, accident alerts, scarcity of resources, whatever, and anticipates what you want to do and helps you to do it with less effort, buying and selling and email and so on. And we think in the not too distant future, every person on the planet who has a smartphone will also have thousands of guardian angels doing different tasks for each individual, which will actually take care of most of the needs. And so the key task they have is to provide, this is what we call the Bill of Rights, digital Bill of Rights, the right information to the right people at the right time, in the right language, in the right medium, and in the right level of detail. So if you take each of these things, you will see there's a huge research agenda that's yet to be done for each of these topics. So I'll start with a specific example. The 2004 tsunami that happened, where about 300,000 people died, many of whom could have been saved if we had the AI and intelligent assistant technologies, and if everyone had some smartphone or something which had these intelligent assistants built in. And the key problem that happened was the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake happened in December 26th, right after Christmas, and with the epicenter somewhere near Sumatra, India. And the shock had a magnitude of 9.1, which is kind of at the extreme end. Most of us see earthquakes at 6 or 7 at most, but not at 9.1. And this caused the plate to be subducted, Indian plate to be subducted under Burma plate, and triggered a series of devastating tsunamis on all the coasts of land masses all the way up to Africa, and killing about 230 to 280,000 people at that time, and inundating coastal communities with tsunami waves of about 100 feet high, which is kind of, you can imagine most of us, our houses are maybe 20, 30 feet high. This would be 3 times higher than that. And it was one of the deadliest natural disasters in the history. And Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India, and Thailand were all seriously affected. The question is, could we have saved all those lives if we could get the right information to the right people? Right information, who are the right people? In this case, these are the people that are living on the coast who are actually living very close to the coastal area and might even be sleeping there because it happened at night or something. And then you need to notify them. It's not enough to simply broadcast something is going to happen because most of them are not going to be listening to your broadcast. So I think in the future, we can aspire to have, agents that would actually wake up the people even if they're sleeping and say, you better get to high ground or something. And this requires a lot of specific capabilities. As soon as the tsunami happens, you need some agent, some authority, not human authority, but a computer authority, has to determine who are all going to be impacted, what are the implications, and when. And then the question is, who are the right people? So basically, if we happen to have at that time, the smartphones didn't come into being until about 2007, 2008, when Steve Jobs introduced the first iPhone. But maybe there were others before then. They did not have all the sensors like location, GPS sensors. So the question of, we may not have been able to help them in 2004, but today, even in India, more than half of the population has smartphones. And we can ultimately expect to find, by purely location determination on each smartphone, who are the people that might be impacted. The question is, what structure must exist globally that would permit everyone to, some system to know somewhere on the cloud where the location of each person is. The problem with that statement is it is true, highly intrusive of your privacy. You may not want to be known where the hell you are. And this one, simply assumes that you can access them. So what we need is some opt-in procedure where if you have a smartphone, I opt in case of high disasters, you can know about my information and notify me. That means you need a communication protocol which will permit you to kind of discover who are the people that might be close. And you can't know that, right? And because if everyone's privacy is being protected, you don't even know where each person is. So first thing you need to say is, anyone that is in these areas should wake up and then notify us where you are and what language you speak and various other things. So, so basically, all of that should happen in matters of seconds, not in hours and days. And so in the right time, in the right language, synthesize a message. All you need here is to say, there's something dangerous happening, you get out of there into some high ground. And you don't want to go into 9.1 magnitude tsunami, this, that, and the other, because most people won't understand that description. So it has to be the right level of detail. So anyway, all of this says there's a lot of things that have to be done for this to work properly. It is not what I can do as an individual. I can opt in and say, in case of emergencies, you are authorized to find out where I am, or something like that. And then the phone companies, Airtel and Jio and so on, must be able to locate those persons in those positions and then provide them with appropriate information. Okay, that gives you a kind of a background on what we need to have. It turns out disasters happen every day. Something bad is happening, fires and accidents and many unplanned events, rains and so on. Some of them are highly deadly, like, this right now, we have a Category 4 hurricane hitting Florida in the next couple of days. And so they're much more serious. In an automotive accident or a fire may not be that much unless it's California fire, where you'll see. So the attributes of disasters are you lose a lot of lives. And the economic impact can be in billions of dollars. And the warning and lead time for these disasters varies significantly from minutes and seconds to minutes to perhaps even days, where we can know when the hurricane is going to hit 3-4 days ahead of time. And the issue of geographic coverage and risk mitigation and other things have to be the response requirements. So there are all kinds of problems in kind of dealing with disasters right now. There are jurisdictional hierarchy, coordination issues, no integrated solutions. Everyone, disasters are one thing where we only plan to do them when it happens. And almost no one plans for disasters. FEMA these days has some pre-positioned resources, but that's all. They can only pre-position within 100-mile radius or something. But from there, you still have to get to the people when it happens. So the question is, do we have a solution for disaster risk mitigation? And so I will kind of go through, because I'm running out of time, 3 major things that we need. We need instant infrastructure when there's and that means what you need, when you need something, you have it instantly. That are all the basic Maslow's hierarchy: food, water, healthcare, energy, communications. And some of them can be provided by robotics, and we have done that in the past, like you can actually have a robot go in, and if there's an earthquake and a building has collapsed, you can deliver food and water and other things to the people that are kind of buried in the debris. Other things like communication, you need instant cell phone towers. And that means you need to drop something, and the energy power is completely knocked out. So you need the cell phone towers to be self-contained and work by themselves and have their own power. And then there are issues of law and order and transportation and government activities. Then you need instant leadership. That is, as soon as a disaster happens, most of the people that are in the position of providing the bureaucratics, the local governor or collector or something, must be there. But if he's already buried in the earthquake somewhere, he can't do that. So the question is, who will take leadership? And we used to call it instant bureaucracy, but the issue of providing leadership, instant leadership, and this means the responders, and this happens in the army, in the defense. When the captain died and is shot, the next in command immediately is promoted to be in charge. So it's very clearly understood in the entire defense forces how these things happen. But in civilian sector, we don't have well-defined or well-understood leadership hierarchy. The last thing we need to also deal with is instant supply chain. You may have food and water and other things, but if it is 100 miles away in some pre-positioned area, you need to get it from there to the affected areas. When you get there, the people might be marooned in a puddle of water, and you need ability to get there independent of what kind of situation there is. So there's a whole set of issues of, we already understand how to do supply chain, but not much has been done about how do you create an instant supply chain? What resources must you have, and where do you have it, right? So the necessary conditions for success in development of intelligent agents is we need infrastructure, what I call the 4 C's, computing device, connectivity, and capacity building. That means every person must have a minimum digital literacy. Otherwise, they won't be able to benefit from it. Then we also need to know where things are, where people are, and people, places, and things that are data resources for dealing with earthquakes. And finally, we need a large cloud computing infrastructure which can know everything about everyone in the whole world. Because at any given time, you don't know which part of the world, which group of people are going to be impacted. So discovering all of that turns out to have a major system. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you.
Thank you, Professor Raj Reddy, for bringing out the importance of right information, right technology to the right people at the right time to take the right decision. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Now I invite Dr. Abhay Karandikar to moderate the entire session and take us through the entire session.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, let me just thank Dr. Raj Reddy for making many insightful comments during his presentation. So now we begin the panel discussion on building the platforms for digital nomads as the theme of this session. As was already mentioned in the beginning, in the introduction by Dr. Bhatia, that digital nomads are already there. And in this panel, we would like to explore that what infrastructure is required for making the digital nomads a reality, what kind of AI-based tools and technologies is needed, and apart from AI, what other infrastructure requirements are there. We would also like to see that what are the technical challenges that are there for the digital nomads in terms of connectivity, security of communications, security of data, availability of collaboration tools, identity verification, crowdsourcing, microtasking, task allocations, solution collections and integrations, and so on. Of course, not to speak of the scalability. And I would like, one of my distinguished panelists to touch upon some of these challenges and also the other challenges that they perceive for the digital nomads to have a flourishing business in the gig economy. Interestingly, traditionally, India also has a large informal sector, a huge base of freelance workers, which is typically unskilled, but also semi-skilled. And in that sense, we would also like to see what is the relevance of the gig economy and digital nomads in the Indian context. Finally, of course, we have on the panelist, panelist with background in economics and also the background working in the social sectors. So if we can touch upon issues like rights of workers, safety nets and minimum wages, or to touch upon the issues whether the workers are employees or entrepreneurs, And what are the challenges for crowdsourcing projects in terms of large team sizes, long duration projects, and the task interdependence. And finally, of course, how we want to expand the gig economy to more areas. So these are, some of the topics that I could think of. But of course, with us, we have a very distinguished panelist with Dr. Amit Pandey, Dr. Shantanu Bhattacharya, Mr. Saurabh Mishra, Dr. Charru, and Mr. Shaul Moreira joining us live from here. So I would request each panelist to give their opening remarks, maybe limited to 7 minutes quickly. And then we will we can go over again and open the discussion for questions from the audience. So thank you very much. So maybe we can begin with Dr. Amit Pandey. Amit, open to you. Floor is yours.
Am I audible and visible?
Yes. Please go ahead.
Let me share the screen and then we are good. Okay. Are you able to see the screen as well?
Yes. If you can do the slideshow, yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Okay, so I will be very quick. Thanks again for having this very nice and very useful panel, and the opening remarks and the presentation from Professor Raj Reddy was really pointing towards what we can achieve when we combine robotics and AI together for addressing some of our challenges. So I will try to give some pointers about how we can combine digital nomad as a kind of way of working and the new technologies, and which kind of sectors we can address through this. And then we will have more time for further discussion, I hope. So what is basically, as we all know, it is a kind of way of working, mostly remotely, and perhaps not fixed location and time. So in the picture, you can see different kinds of digital nomads. And the thing here is we need at least someone to start everything. And then we need the world. And between that, we need obviously coffee and tea, but some medium to work or to communicate, either with the physical world or with the people in the world. So this is very global and one very generic picture that how we can facilitate this digital nomad ecosystem of working. So the important part is that the kind of medium tells us that what one can do. And if it is a smart device, then obviously there are lots of things which can be done, but obviously there will be some limitations as well. So the focus will be that if we will change this medium, or if we will augment the medium with other kinds of tools like drones or manipulator robots, or why not a kind of humanoid robot. So it is again facilitating to do the things in a different way by using different kind of medium. And if we will use robots, then they will enable us to sense and act physically in the environment. And that will facilitate even depending on the kind of robot, to have a kind of remote social presence. And obviously the distance barrier will be reduced, and it is getting reduced by using any of the technology or medium. So I will quickly point about some of the potentials of using combination of technology, and that will be how we can bring robots and AI together, and we can achieve some sort of personalized solution, because every country, every culture, every person is different. And it is not to replace, but it is to bridge the gap and bring people together by even supplementing their abilities and empowering to do the difficult things, which is already there is a long list of difficult things for again, as I mentioned, for different kind of people. And especially in COVID and post-COVID era, how to ensure that social distancing is not leading to social isolation or emotional isolation, and ensuring the safety at the same time. And so using, again, as Professor Reddy was saying, teleoperated robots can really help for many applications in this current context, including tele-monitoring, tele-service delivery, tele-diagnosis, and at the same time ensuring the distance and the safety. And there is a wide spectrum of usage of this kind of robots by remote operator in this current scenario. I encourage you to explore further in this direction. Then healthcare and elderly care is again something, and because the idea is that if people are living alone or isolated, they should not be unnoticed, or they should not feel disconnected from the community. So how to support healthy and active aging and living? And there are lots of projects and activities which are going in those direction, including again personalized and preventive healthcare, telemonitoring, telemedicine, and transcultural nursing, and boosting physical and cognitive health. Again, having some embodied agent in the environment like robots, either it is autonomous or controlled remotely, is seen very useful in this type of situation. And at least it should facilitate that no one should die just because of not being noticed on time, either being at home or being isolated. So why not to use some sort of medium to connect two parts of the spectrum? Again, education has lots of application like remote learning, remote teaching, and even there is one interesting application which is related to job. There are lots of interesting deployments which are happening where someone who is differently able is able to get a job which requires physical capabilities. And especially in the current era, this type of teleoperated robots are very much getting used for that aspects. And we are also working on some project in India to facilitate working telemedicine and telehealth care using robots. And agriculture, again, there are lots of application like how you can do remote monitoring, mapping, surveying, spraying using the right kind of technology. Tourism, again, remote guide, remote assistance, we can think about all these. Art and culture is also one area where we can think about using this type of technology to at least to preserve our spread awareness, where physical presence of human is not always possible. And there are many other applications which Professor Reddy has also mentioned, disaster relief and many other sectors. So the question is again back that the medium is enabling to do things differently, or to do things more. And then there are lots of questions in terms of technology, that what should be the autonomy level of this technology, how autonomous they should be, where should be the control, how much the control humans should have, and how to implement those type of semi-autonomy or mixed autonomy of such technology. Then how the interaction should be initiated. It should be proactive, like the technology or robot is sensing something, sending back, or it should be always initiated by a human user. Then what should be the command line, then the privacy issue of security, privacy, cloud, all these are very hot topic for discussion, including the social, legal, and ethical aspects. So I think we will have more time for this type of discussion, but I will close my part by saying that we need to really have right kind of integrated approach, the multidisciplinary collaboration with right skills and experience. so that the robots and the society and all the workers can be integrated tightly to provide a solution which is useful and which is scalable. So just take an example. If we want to build a hot and cold water tap where we can control the mixed water level, which is something we want to do. We want to get the result on the right, but if it is not done, we will get something like this, where we have two taps for different hot and cold water. We are trying to find a breeze and then making some arrangement, and then we are trying to get something which is not really scalable, or which is not perhaps going to make some changes in the way we want. So that's why the very important is to create the right ecosystem. And there are all these players who should be coming together: industry, individual, policymaker, academics, public, media, insurance, funding, and then we can empower really all the people in the ecosystem, including digital nomads. So I will stop here. Thanks a lot for your attention. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Pandey, for pointing out the importance of tele-robotics, also different applications, and emphasizing the importance of collaboration with different parts or different components of this. So thank you. May I request Dr. Charru? Again, I request you to restrict to 7 minutes, then so that we will have time for everyone.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Just give me.
Yes, I think we can see the screen. If you can unmute, and the floor is yours. Yeah.
So thank you, and I'm so glad about the coincidence that almost all the speakers are on the same page to digital nomads to be perceived under a governance scenario. Best is my warmest regards to Professor Well for giving us a chance. So part which was a joyous journey, and for this I really stay indebted to my organization. Okay, so this is how I intend to go about. I would first, as was pointed out by the previous speakers, let my my flights of fancy take some kind of grounded work and give some possible scenarios as was discussed. And as Dr. Amit also said, we need to look into the issues and challenges, which I'm calling neither as a challenge nor as a headwind, but as a dilemma. And then I'll move on to probably look into how should the revised legal and regulatory framework should be and the way forward for a country which is as diverse as India. So yes, whenever we work in the field of governance, we should always keep our eyes on the goals, which are sustainable goals. With that in mind, some of the governance scenarios where I visualize my public service delivery agents as digital nomads who are serving people from anywhere, irrespective of the infrastructure or irrespective of the geolocation. And this is where we would have full advantage of tele-robotics. The whole idea, as was also very surprisingly said by our keynote speaker, is all about giving right information to right people at the right time. So taking a cue from this kind of basic goal, I have covered 4 aspects of governance, starting with the first one. Yes, we can look at inclusive spaces where the remote operating vehicles could be used for serving elderly people, especially abled and sick people, as was also pointed out by Dr. Amit. It is also about, in Indian context, all about remote provisioning of public goods and services in remote areas, in inaccessible areas, and in disaster-prone areas. Moving on to medical, all of us are aware of possibilities of remote control experiments in labs, which happened during pandemic times. I was also trying to look at the possibility of augmenting our public health centers and our common service centers with these facilities where remote surgery or basic health e-monitoring could be done. Moving on to creation of clean and green safe spaces, I really would applaud the day we have semi-automated, automated, or controlled robots for scavenging and for toxic waste management, which is a topic which is very dear to philanthropic part of me, because every time we pick up very excruciatingly painful. Also, we could use these robots for structural inspections of natural and man-made resources, even for tough constructions. Coming to safety and security, these are just 4 aspects I've covered up, which could kind of, extended elsewhere. I personally feel when it comes to our frontline workers, because of a communication gap or because of other constraints, not able to sensitize general public, like Professor Reddy also said, it's all about making people aware of what is happening in the tech spaces and to make them, to reassure them, to build up the trust, which is very important for us in GovTech domain. So such kind of robots could be used for field work, sensitization and awareness campaigns. Yes, I am aware of, through my exposure to some armed forces personnel, that we have used artificial intelligence and machine learning to a large extent for perceiving national threats. We could look into also cyber risk, which is now becoming a very intrusive component of our existence, especially with ongoing Industry Revolution 4.0. And last but not the least, all about AI as well as these robots is delivering personalized and contextualized services and manufacturing. So these are some of the aspects of governance, which I'm calling as governance 5.0, for the simple reason that my agent, public service delivery agent or front field worker could be anywhere. Now, the issues, it's not as easy as all of us are aware. The moment we deploy technology, we capture data. The moment we capture data, we become vulnerable. Now, my concern is not just about conventional cybersecurity threats. I'm more worried about, as Prime Minister also said, weaponization of AI in unpredictable manner. I mean, there could be a cluster of robots which are using nanotechnologies plugged onto my political leader and capturing the data, or the entire city could be at risk. So nature of crime would change, and similarly the privacy concerns would also be very different. The moment we are rubbing shoulders with a robot which is capturing my data, I am not sure how invasive that would be. We also are very aware of some countries in the world which are using data, especially AI-based data, to monitor activities of citizens, which is very, very 1984-like, and this should be kind of avoided by proper checks and balances. Dear friends, the moment we bring in robots in our existence so much, I'm not being fictional, with a lot of assertion, I'm saying we could have now a concept of robotic hegemony. I'm referring to obviously all those things that would have come into mind of my dear audience, like a movie, like a serial like Wall-E, or so many other options. And as was pointed out, do we have leaders to handle this kind of change? Coming to second aspects, it's all about money for, as Professor Reddy also said, building up cloud infrastructure, building up 5G infrastructure. It is also about recursive capacity building investments in our nomads, which are public service delivery nomads, our end beneficiaries, and also incubating startup ecosystem. Social is my biggest concern, dear friends, because the kind of relationships human beings would now share with robots would be very unpredictable. Robots might intrude into our personal existence. They might lead us to become obese, and there could be several other health challenges. I'm also very concerned about lopsided emphasis on technology, probably leading death to fine art and creativity options, though we claim to the contrary. However, we are still not sure. Too much of IT proliferation might create job scenarios or situations where finer aspects of living could be ignored. There would be a new social order for robots. I mean, I'm not talking about a Brahminical caste system, but I'm very scared about a possibility of a robot by a particular proprietor proprietary being being rated as category A robo and category B robo and so on. Up from better IT channels and aspects, we also need to look at human operator overload conditions when we usher in so much of technology from our robotic front. How about internet suddenly and networking suddenly collapsing, where we would end up, especially when we are proposing this in critical sectors like health and disaster management. Also, dear friends, don't take it with a smirk, take it very seriously. Where would you dump your outdated robots? Do we need a separate cremation ground for robots? How about all the space debris that would be created? So these are some of my concerns, which I'm calling as pest. So there is always an answer. I did some research on what the other countries are doing. So that has already been pointed when it comes to AI, but I very strongly feel for our country, we need an AI Act. We also need to look at the entire process of creating legal and regulatory framework, which should be very responsive, like Sir said, instant. I would call agile, recursive. It should not be a deadlock that you have first act coming in 2000 and then the next one comes after 8 years. It should not be post event. It should be co-created, as all of us know, with academia and civil service, civil society, along with industry and the legal bodies. Very, very important is privacy, ethics, and empathy should not be left to the end beneficiary. We are referring to India, and Indian situation and Indian citizen should be, left scot-free. And this should actually come, the onus should be on the manufacturer as well as the designer of such systems. Proprietary controls should be diluted. We are seeing the repercussion of such proprietary controls at present. Fifth point is very important from Indian perspective. As I was sharing with my co-speakers, I have seen enough India 600 villages. I keep saying, and I'm very proud of that. Each part of my country is so beautiful and so different. So we need to train data sets which are specifically responsive to Indian diversity. We should also ensure that all layers are taken care. Digital unite should be the game and not the digital divide aspect. And especially my service delivery agents, my front-end workers should be reassured. India has already done some work and other countries have done, but we need to think together. This is India from my eyes, diverse and dynamic, beautiful and moving fast. With that in mind, let us try to create an India where AI is for all, for which we need to co-create. Dear panelists and audience, yes, we need to co-create not just with academia and industry, but let's take and autonomous robots on board. We need to have an education system which is not just AI, but AI with human touch. We need to go local in a big way. And we need to have some social responsibility for building up digital gaps and providing last mile connectivity. So I really look forward to Governance 5.0, and I really want to give way to a very agile structure. Thanks everybody, especially METI, NAGD, and my beautiful institute, which has let me flourish. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Charru, for pointing out, challenges in the governance 5.0, as you called. So I would now invite the next speaker, Dr. Shantanu Bhattacharya. So Shantanu. Dr. Charru, can you stop sharing the slides, your slides? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Shantanu. The floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, the
If you can just, Shantanu, if you can just do a slideshow, that would be good.
Yeah, just did that. Thank you so much, Dr. Karandikar. Thank you so much, Dr. Raj Reddy. Thank you, the previous speakers. And thank you, the audience. Wonderful talk so far, wonderful conversations. What I wanted to talk about today was about the India class AI. This is something I've been thinking about for the past few years. Saying that, look, there are a couple of models in the world that are sort of being built around for AI. In the US, had this classic DARPA-led private sector followed model of AI. China has its own model for building out AI at a national scale. In order to be an AI superpower in the future and build our foundations, our own unique AI future, we need to do something that's probably either follow those models and see if that works for our context. But more importantly, we need to build our own AI future. Why is it our own future? We are a very unique nation. We are a nation of 122 languages, 1,600 dialects. I come from a part of the country, the northeast part of the country, where a small town can have, town of 7 lakh people, a couple of lakh people can have 8 or 10 languages being spoken. We are low middle income. We have limited spend. Yet we are a big luxury market. As Professor Reddy pointed out, while the smartphone grew 12% in 2019, we are yet very dominated by a feature phone world. To the rest of the world, it would look like a big disadvantage. But I would say that this is a big advantage for India. Things that are built for India with the constraints that you have, multi-language, feature phone dominated, the networks that are not necessarily the telecom networks that are not necessarily in the Western standard, infrastructure that may not be of that caliber. Things that are built for under this constraint can conquer the world. So I'll start with a few examples. So, for example, you, I, and the 300 million Indians, most people who are listening to this conversation, people who have access to the internet, the first 300 million came into the internet using an interface, either using a computer just like I did, or using this one, a smartphone. These are the early adopters. So you have used Facebook, Twitter, Google, etc., etc. But what happens to the next billion when India's next billion population comes on the internet? They're not going to go do it. The infrastructure is not going to be the smartphones, for some of them it would be, or the laptops, or the tablets, but it's going to be the voice. A lot of them are not necessarily conversant well enough in English, or may not be able to read and write in the local languages, even in the local languages. So they're going to do an interface that's called speech. That's something that will usher a revolution for the next billion on the internet. So India is going to go build those techs for its own people, because if you don't do it, no one else will do it. So until 2018, when I came back to India after many years, in 2015, after spending many, many years abroad, until about 2018, 2017, 2018, one of the things that sort of surprised me is that people are still using their phones somewhat sparingly. Data was costly. The phones were still largely, I think India back then was 70+% feature phones. A lot of them were not data capable. But then the explosion happened in the past 2 years. So I'll give you an example of my employer, Airtel. We have 300 million plus customers who consume about 97 petabyte of data every single day. That's humongous amount of data. That's about a couple of billion hours worth of videos that are consumed every day. We collect about 400 billion events per day. So, for example, when you are browsing a page on your phone, that's an event. When you are turning off your phone, that's an event. When you're connecting to a cell tower, that's an event. When you are starting a call, that's an event, and so on, including 24 billion data sessions. That's a huge number for anyone. And that many, what I call in terms of data science, that many signals will enable actually you build the details of what our consumption patterns are, behaviors are, and so on, and enable us to use those information for driving commerce. So I'll give an example again in the Indian context. Location addressing. If you think of the past few years, the e-commerce companies have grown, exponentially, especially in the post-COVID world, where they're ordering everything from food, grocery, essential necessities, all of it over e-commerce or with the food delivery partners or your grocery delivery partner. One of the challenges that, let me explain, my house in California, the address can be written in only one way. The house number, the road, the town, and the city and the state and the postcode. My house in Bangalore, on the other hand, in 6 government documents, it's written in 6 different ways. It's either a house or a villa or a townhouse or even an apartment. So different addresses will take it differently. It's either in the way the apartment complexes or the villa complex's name is written is different in different documents. The locality is either Mahadevpura or Garuda Charpalya or Mahadevpura Garuda Charpalya, which does not exist on Google. And then the pin code is often wrong. So if you look at just the address, which is taken as a standard in the Western countries, which no one sort of disputes about, right? Its structure is easily disambiguated. In India, less than 5% are fully structured, 30% are semi-structured, and if you go to a small town where you grew up, the addresses can be anywhere. Things are multilingual. Going back to my previous point, in Kohima, which is a small town, 20 square kilometer, capital of Nagaland, just in a 20 square kilometer town, less than about 1 lakh of population, 17 languages are spoken. So if you just try to solve that problem, address as a problem, which does not exist in the developed world, and use AI for that, you could get huge efficiencies. The first company that I worked for after coming back to India was called Delivery, which is now one of India's unicorns. We use these technologies and we're able to make the system about over 20% more efficient over a period of just 2 years. So what does this do? If we go build what I call as an India class AI problems and don't necessarily just copy the West and copy or maybe even China, we can build new classes of AI products that will essentially drive the economic benefits significantly. So just take an example of what you do. In the villages in India, in the remote parts of India, the data is not available. If you look at census data, for example, Eastern UP, and this is where I was thinking of Dr. Charru, 600 villages. And this is exactly what I did, Went to different places where the data is not available. So for example, in our case, we need to figure out, in Airtel's case, we need to figure out where the next tower, the cell phone tower, should come up. In absence of population data or prosperity data, it's very hard to make that economic decision. For example, the census data is going back to 2011 now. The 2021 census will not probably begin because of the pandemic. So the data is about 10 years old. In India, 10 years, the size of the economy doubled. In fact, more than doubled. So places that are tiny villages are now small Mofussil towns are mid-sized town, and so on. The population has changed. Things that have not had road have now national highways going next to it and much more prosperous. So how do you build that information? How do you get that information, which will make, for example, a cell phone company to build a cell phone tower, a logistics company to figure out whether they have to set up a hub there, a consumer products goods company to figure out whether they can expand businesses there. So what you built is something called an automated prosperity index of India. We looked at the Google data. We looked at NASA's nighttime illumination. By the way, illumination is a great source of prosperity. If you have lights that are kind of in villages, it usually indicates that you have money to turn on electricity at night. And we essentially automatically created, on the left in the image, you see the village. On the right in this image, you are seeing we are automatically indexing. For example, the road that's going through the Kacha road, that's going to the unpaved road that's going through the villages is in green. The land that's not been cultivated is in dark blue, and so on. So we can now put all these signals, the roads, the condition of the roads, the width of the road, whether there's a canal going next to the village, the width of the canal, does the canal have water, the houses, the size and shapes of the houses, how big the house is. All of these build an automated prosperity index, and then use that information for making decisions. And we have been starting to do it, and quoting the MIT Emerging World group, where I'm also a researcher, we actually estimated the benefits of this India class AI are huge. It's about 0.5% to about one. On the low end, it's about 0.5% of the GDP. On the higher end, it could be as high as 1.5% of the GDP. Again, this is a very India-specific problem that no one else will solve for us. Addresses ambiguation, gender identification, age classification, language detection, income and prosperity indices, and many, many more. Fortunately, this is not something that's sort of unheard of. There are a new generation of companies that are starting to build those infrastructure, all this data. I'm just, if you look at the stack we have is the planetary scale data, that's what I called it. The data rights on top of this, the artificial intelligence that people are employing. This is just an illustrative set of startups. There are many more who are sort of using these technologies, using the AI to build what I would call is building very, very specific technologies for powering the new Indian economy. And I think in this Race 2020 Summit, there's only one thing I would ask for as my closing comment. Let's collaborate. We are smart people. We have tons of data that we didn't have 2 years back. The algorithms are not the hardest part. And with all of this, we can actually go build our own class of AI to take a very different path than US, China, or others and chart our own future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shantanu. I think the point of collaboration was made even earlier as well, and thank you for making a case for India class AI. We will come back to this for discussions. I'm sure you will get a lot of questions from the audience on this. So may I now request Mr. Saurabh Mishra to share his thoughts, and I request the organizer to share his slides, please. And Shantanu, may I request you to stop sharing your slides so that we can have Saurabh's slides here.
Thank you. Just done.
Yes. Can I have Saurabh's slides? Jai, you are going to, yes, please. Great. So if we can have them.
Excellent.
Yes, Saurabh, yeah, floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Karandikar, and for a lively discussion already. I'd like to contextualize my opening remarks by mentioning three things. One is the growth pattern of India, which has been very service-led. Then dive deeper into how data could guide India's national AI policy and strategy. And third, a practical example of how AI could guide policy decisions in India, specifically on mega project and infrastructure investments, which has been a theme for many of the discussants already. To begin with, there has been a bias globally of a manufacturing-led growth strategy, whereas India has been a poster child of service-led growth pattern. And what you see in this graph is the GDP growth with various sectoral value-added growth. And services are the third, manufacturing the second, and agriculture. And what we note is that per unit of value-added growth in services leads to higher GDP growth. As we know, the 70% and increasingly of more than that of hardware is a service. What we note also is that buyers and sellers can be trading services through digital nomads, as we're talking about. It's all about the resilience of service-led economy that is guiding our global economy and India's growth. So considering this point, it's important to contextualize India's comparative advantage and how we should leverage that for future growth of AI service-led economic growth. Next slide, please. So with this context, given that AI is a service business, a lot of the work at Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI and our work at the AI Index is about tracking progress in AI and how it's impacting the economy and society. There's a quick example of graph which shows the progress that we've already witnessed in AI. This is about ImageNet object detection to get over 90% accuracy not just progress in terms of getting to this high level of accuracy in various tasks, but you see the time to generate this high level of accuracy within 2 years has reduced from over 10,000 minutes to now, more recently, 47 seconds. Similarly, cost of training ImageNet, as an example, has reduced drastically from thousands of dollars to a couple of dollars in single digits. So AI is a very data-driven field, but very little amount of data that is available to track progress in AI. Next slide, please. So in addition to technical progress, what we have also seen is the economic impact of AI. And what we see here in this graph is the skill penetration of AI and number of unique occupations from male and female comparing across countries. This is based on data from LinkedIn, which shows that India is on top, even beyond the United States, in terms of female skill penetration of AI. So from an inclusion perspective, and the inherent capabilities and endowments that India has in a service-led growth, skills of women in AI, these are important points to highlight of how we can leverage our capabilities for the next generation of India's growth model. Next slide, please. So being said, many of these progress in AI, from a global perspective, I would like to highlight there's many measurement challenges when we talk about AI progress. Next slide, please. And we'd organized a workshop paper with over 150 experts around the world on measurement in AI policy. And succinctly to put it, we had detailed discussions about this, but came across with 6 key challenges dealing with measurement in AI policy. Next slide, please. And one of the first big challenges is that of what is AI? This is a very important question because how we define AI has significant downstream effects on how we measure R&D productivity, public or private investment in AI, labor market impact on AI, and so forth. So it's important to have a common collaborative effort on how we think about what is AI. The second big question here is what contributes to AI progress? It could be hardware improvements, it could be data contribution in terms of training data that's being used, or modeling innovation. So there are a lot of uncertainties associated measuring AI's progress and could give an illusion of progress and overstatement of progress if we don't measure these things right. The third big question we've highlighted is that how do we use bibliometrics data to analyze AI and its impact on our world? Bibliometrics data is very important to assess collaboration across private and public sector, how much R&D is happening, the life cycle of invention of AI. So cracking this is a big question. A fourth big question is how we measure the economic impact of AI, especially on the labor market dynamics. As someone mentioned, India has almost a 90% informal market. And how is AI going to impact the informal sector, economic growth and well-being? We have to measure AI inputs, skills, software, data, management practices, but also AI outputs in terms of consumption patterns of companies and the government. Fifth question is how do we measure the societal impact of AI? And in this regard, particularly on sustainable economic development, on diversity, human rights, and security. But again, there's a paucity of data about AI and sustainable development goals. And that's a huge constraint how we would start even thinking about answering some of these big questions. The last question that we identified was how do we measure the risks and threats of deployed AI systems? And to this effect, how do we analyze risks of fake news, deep fake videos, autonomous weapons, surveillance, applications? Now, from a policy and practical perspective, there's a huge problem here where there's a global deficit in data scientists. And large organizations, companies, and governments tend to neglect the tons of external data that's already out there in the world to build mission critical predictive insights to catch these trends that our previous speaker mentioned, from census, from Google Trends, from Ministry of Finance, RBI, and various sources, to predict things, to catch these global trends and shift these businesses. And India, as we very well know, has a massive infrastructure a plan over $1 trillion. But how do we manage the risk associated with active portfolio management of these roads, bridges, schools, but also catching where demand for where schools need to be built at localized levels? So to this effect, to address how these mega projects would be managed and the demand for them would be guided, a lot of these solutions, by catching and having this full stack of a planetary scale about global trends that are taking place, building predictions on top of this, and tracking new insights through metrics about specific cities, states, to guide decision making and level the playing field of information across citizens, private sector, and government agencies, is a huge problem where AI can play a role. Next slide, please. If we were to able to predict all of these various scenarios with uncertainty bounds from multiple different sources, it could help us catch these risks before they might happen, much like Professor Reddy's talk earlier, but also as we are potentially dealing with these crises, mitigate these risks in real time by reducing the coordination failure and information asymmetry by tracking data from multiple of these sources. My last slide, please. The punchline here would be referring to an ice hockey legend, where this ice hockey legend would not go to where the puck is right now, but will estimate where it would be, and that's why he was able to become a great like Sachin Tendulkar. So I will stop there, and my point being here that if we could, as human beings and large organizations, could catch these trends before they happen by monitoring all this data around us, making sense of it, we could help all of us make more informed decisions. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Saurabh, for making a point on the measurements in the AI, particularly, that can impact the policy changes. And of course, as you know, that these policy changes are happening very fast. So even these measurement scales also need to be, I guess, calibrated. I will have one question on this later, but we have our last speaker on the panel, Mr. Shaul Moreira. So can I request him to share the screen and the slides, please? Yes, sure. Please, floor is yours. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Can you see the screen?
Yes, yes. I think you can do a full screen. Yeah, yes, slideshow. Okay, yes, great.
I'll be as brief as possible. Is a lot of material to go over. So basically, within Oracle, we have a few solutions to be able to do AI. One is the data science, which deals with sound, video streaming, and images. And the other one is a data warehouse in our database where we can do data-driven type of AI solutions. What I'll concentrate on, because that's what I've been spending most of my time, is on the sound and video streaming areas of AI. These are tactical solutions to address problems, throughout different cities or states across the United States. And so in essence, one of the key differences is that, regardless of which sector we're dealing with, where we're dealing with construction, we're dealing with utilities, we're dealing with communications, we're dealing with smart cities, there's a lot of applicability for AI to be able to solve problems, correct? And one of the key differentiators is once you identify an event of the problem that you're searching for within AI, then what happens to that particular event? So one of the things that we do on our end is be able to have an end-to-end solution, meaning, to be able to define what that asset, the status of the asset, and what do we do afterwards, which is send that individual record into one of the solutions that are built, are enterprise applications, either for utilities, for construction, or communications. And I'll be very brief. So because I want to get to a point here. So and I'm not going to go too much over this. So there's the technical aspect. There's the mathematical formulas that we use to be able to come to a model that has a 92% accuracy level. We deal with a few computations, and this is as simple as I can draw it, but it ends up being as complicated as this. And complicated doesn't mean that we're going to have an accuracy of the model that is required. So those are the things that we need to balance, correct? The data, the convolutions, and the algorithm that we pick to be able to come up with that actual solution. So in essence, this is what we're after, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we're after the probability of the normalized probability, for us to detect that this is a type of animal that happens to be a panda. The other one is the negative loss, which will also indicate, for us, what is that we're looking at. One of the key areas here is what is machine learning in a nutshell. So there's a representation, the evaluation, and optimization of data. That's one of the key things that we need to look into. So that's what I define as the understanding of the technology and the algorithms, as well as the mathematical functions for us to have a very high accurate model. So in essence, on my end, I've been exposed to this for a few years. So most of the stuff that we do as far as solving problems has to do with decision tree, neural networks, and SVMs, correct? The rest I have not applied to solve problems, but in essence, that's what we concentrate on here. The optimization, whether we're talking about gradient descent, linear programming, and those things to be able to come up with an optimal model. And the types of learning, everything that I've done thus far has to do with supervised for a lot of the use cases that you're going to see, for a few of the use cases you're going to see. The other one is unsupervised learning. With that when we deal with that, is that we're solving problems like the one Dr. Reddy mentioned, which is how do we deal with an event such as a catastrophe, of a flood, of a hurricane. Those are the type of things that we're solving now, correct? And we need to be able to take immediate action whenever a hurricane happens. And right now we're in the process of building that solution. So I'm not gonna go over that, but one of the key things that I wanna stress is this. One of the key areas is that we need to fully understand the domain, as well as the technology, of course, because there is no way for us to solve a problem without fully understanding the domain. So, the selection and the cleaning process, the learning models, the data annotation, the data augmentation, the interpreting results, and, basically the deployment, that is very critical for us, because in the deployment of the model is, sometimes the area where we're solving that particular use case might not be conducive to have the connectivity required to be able to do a particular solution. So in that case, we need to re-architect that. But this is what I meant domain knowledge. For example, we're dealing with about 80 some use cases for the utility, also construction, that in order for us to detect a woodpecker hole, correct? The structural damage will be depicted in that red area. So we not only have the ability to detect through the flight of a drone, the size of a hole, but also it's just as important where is that hole is located, correct? So the domain knowledge is just as important. That is very key and very critical. That's something that we do spend a lot of time on, trying to understand the problem that we're trying to solve and how we're trying to solve it. So when we build these models, we need to understand the structure, the geometry, and measurements, and as well as the frame comes back to us and be able to do the detection and where is that detection is located. So that's what we apply a few things that we learned through the years of we've been doing this to be able to solve a particular problem. As far as data augmentation, that's something that we do. Lighting conditions and many other permutations that we go through to be able to get the accuracy of the model. So where I'm going to go next is the actual use cases, and this is very big. This is applicable in many areas. We came up with this solution for the construction utilities, which is being able to detect a violation of social distancing within a crew of 100 people that are building this massive utility infrastructure. But what's unique about this is that this is also applicable in multiple areas, correct? We've been asked to do the same solution for higher education, for K through 12, for utilities themselves, for manufacturing, for events. So for government, which is just a big, where there's a library, where there's an area of government where people congregate, or an event that the government is hosting. People need to know what is going on as far as social distancing and the number of violations. We've been asked to do things such as this, for a storm to go off whenever there's a percentage that is higher than usual, so people can take corrective action. So what happens is this is done through a live frame. We run this through the model, what we call the social distancing model, in order for us to detect who are the individuals that are, committing the violation of social distancing. So we can take action like the one I said, go ahead and turn on a strobe, so they know that there are violations happening. But also in the case of, let's say, higher education or a school, we also will change policy, or they'll change policy based upon the policy that they define for students to traverse to this hallway from north to south and from south to north, and they see that the violation is 25% or 30%, then perhaps they need to consider changing policy. And that is key, for us, not just identify the single individual event of violation, but also do the collection of events whenever this model is being put in place for that particular area. And this model is being discussed to be put in the cafeteria, to be put in many areas, and you will see the examples of that in a second. But at the end of the day, what's so important is, what do we do with all this data? Do they make a change into the policy? Do they do training? Whatever aspects happens afterwards, that's something that the entity will need to deal with. But we definitely can provide, the unique events, if we can also provide the collective events for them to change that. So one of the things that, so we're involved in many solutions within cities, counties, and, basic government entities, is the ability to infuse cameras on the trash refuse trucks, and for them to identify any asset that is broken throughout the city, correct? And that's something that we have a few models to be able to deal with potholes, to be able to deal with broken tree branches, to be able to do the signaling, all these things that, a city has problems, day in and day out, to be able to address and assess. So one of the solutions that we put together in India with NITI Aayog is the ability to do cancer screening, correct? Part of the challenge is that we have this vehicles that go out, do have the equipment, but what we now have is the ability for us to do cancer detection, by the operator, and put all that intelligence to build a model that is typically done by a radiologist within this model that was built, correct? And that model is current. It wasn't just built, but it was also deployed into this mobile unit, right? And that we can serve many hundreds and millions of people in a timely basis, so they can take action, on. Hold on one second here. Give me 1 second. I seem to have frozen here. Okay, so let me run to these use cases that I have here, and I'm hoping that you can see my screen. So that we put together. Let me see here. And I'm hoping I don't run out of time here. Okay. So, okay, let me continue with this, since that movie is not being helpful. So let me address another use case that we're currently working on is another use case that we're currently working on, which has to do with before and after floods, or before and after hurricane. So a utility came to us and asked whether we can assist them dealing with identifying broken areas, meaning that are flooded, broken equipment, buildings, for us to be able to assess and what data is that we need in order for us to deal with those particular problems. So in our case, we're utilizing LiDAR to be able to not only detect, the size, the height, and the many permutations of that asset. In this case, buildings, townhomes, forests, all these things as we take a look at. We change a few of the algorithms to be able to detect the features of roughness of edges of the building, many things that we need to be able to identify what is wrong with that particular building. So in essence, we utilize random forestry to be able to detect the roads, to be able to detect cars, to be able to detect buildings, and eventually we'll be able to detect transmission lines and the health of the transmission line. So this is how it looks to us, correct? Through all this
advantage. And a lot of companies, at least in the public sector, if they build it ahead of someone else, will be seen as a competitive advantage. And they may want to hold on to that in order to gain market share. And this is happening around the world, right? The proprietary models, proprietary data always tended to be kept within the company. So if you think about a public-private partnership, where a part of the data is public, it's for common good, part of the data is private, where you build on top of that. I think that's a model you should think about.
Okay, I think that's interesting. So we can take some questions from the audience. If there are any questions, I think, so there first question was that, what steps should be taken to bridge the digital divide? And particularly, I think this is important in the context of when we are creating a workforce in the form of digital nomads, and if there is a digital divide, how do you address this? So any panelist who would like to take up this? This is a general question from the audience. Yeah, Raj, I think Professor Raj Reddy wants to answer. Can you unmute, Raj?
No, just to add to that, I have for long advocated connectivity of the population is the most important thing the country can do, that we have to figure out how to give every person a smartphone. And I calculated the total cost of doing that is about $140 billion, okay? 1.4 billion times $100. It turns out we are spent this year just for the lockdown, the cost is between $300 to $600 billion, okay? So the relative cost of providing everyone, so digital divide, you have to start at the basic necessities: computers, connectivity, and capacity. You need to train everybody. So those are the things, I think, we can do them. It's easy to do, except giving everyone a smartphone. We have a huge universal service obligation, and there is no reason why we are charging 20,000 crores for licensing. Instead, we should say every phone company, Airtel and Jio and so on, should provide unlimited bandwidth to all the students. No restrictions whatsoever. And there may be all kinds of ways in which we can overcome the digital divide, but it requires commitment and determination at the highest levels.
Absolutely. I think this is a good point. And not only, I think, the device, you talked of smartphone, which is like the device, but also we need, the connectivity infrastructure. We need to go to remote rural areas because there is a large workforce in the Indian context, which is, lying in the rural areas where the connectivity in terms of infrastructure connectivity is also important apart from the device.
We have 5G in our title of our panel. We didn't talk that much about 5G, but there's no reason why every person should not have access to 5G unlimited.
In fact, that is my area of work, actually.
May I make a request? I have the video running. I can run the video in the background while we answer questions, if you don't mind.
Sir, Abhay, can I?
So just wait. I think Dr. Charru wants to make a point. Yeah, Charru, go ahead.
Sir, adding to what Dr. Reddy just said, I also believe that we should look for local solutions to eliminate digital divide. I've been to various parts and I found community radio doing such a good job. I found common service centers doing their bit. So, and why not go back to Akash and Simputers and Infothala kind of local solutions, which academia can bring in. And I do recall IITs had done a lot of job on that. And as I also said in my presentation, we have to usher in a concept of what I very, passionately advocate is digital daan. Go back to your homes and you see so much of surplus digital devices lying with you that you don't even think of passing it on to the next one who needs it. So there are several local solutions which we need to have Atmanirbhar approach to bridge this digital gap.
Thank you. I think you made a good point of common service centers. Actually, In fact, I'm associated with this. CSC is having a CSC Wi-Fi Chopal Services as a company which is laying out the Wi-Fi hotspots in the rural areas. And I think you talked about the community radio. We are talking of community networks where the networks actually can be managed by the village level entrepreneurs as well, which can actually lease the bandwidth from the big operators like Airtel, which Shantanu is a part of. And because I think for a big operator, really the overhead cost is and the operational cost is very high. And therefore, we could really go for the decentralized mode where the village level entrepreneurs can also pitch in collaborations with the operators such as Airtel. So is there any question from the audience? Can the organizers tell? Are there any questions? Because the floor is open.
Before we go to the, if I can build on Dr. Charru's comment, in addition to a community radio, you can also have a community TV, and we encourage every person with a smartphone to take video snippets and share it to the TV, and they can be, covered and presented.
Absolutely.
I'll add one point, Abhay.
It's already done that, sir. Smart TVs are being used and VSAT networks are being used for connectivity till the last mile. Our secretary himself has worked on this project. So I think there's a lot India can share. And BharatNet is doing a very good job with regard to your connectivity issues and also Digital India program. So we are there on the track. The only thing is the diversity creates its own issues. So that's why.
I'll add one more point. I think we should take advantage of our big tradition of being able to train millions of people. Think of IT industry. In a span of few years, we train millions and millions of people, right? The next generation of industry, the whole world will go through a digitization in the next 4 to 5 years, right? For example, Standard Chartered said by 2024, they'll put all their systems on the cloud, right? That's a massive digitization task around the world, and COVID-19 is only accelerating it. Without tradition of being able to train, I mean, the Infosys of the world, let's not forget their contribution to the economy. They've been able to train millions of people in a span of very short time. Why not take advantage of that and sort of build the foundation of the next generation economy in a very short time span?
Absolutely. I think
build a national task force saying these are the 5 tasks we need to do, and just go on to it for the next 5 years. It will change the face of India very, very quickly. This is the
Thank you. Thank you.
I can add one point.
Yes, Amit. And I think, Amit, there is another related question to you that I wanted to ask is, since you talked about the tele-robotics and also the collaborations model that you had suggested, I think if you can elaborate its relevance in the Indian context again. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think I will start from this digital divide part. So I think one of the interesting things will be to create awareness as well that yes, there is a digital divide, and that awareness should be on the both sides of the gap. So that the both side will try to take steps to bridge the gap, instead of one side coming to the other side and saying, okay, there is a gap and I am here to bridge it. And then those type of awareness should be really started at a grassroots level, because personally I also know many people in India that who don't feel any need of go digital, and how we can create that awareness and the need and the positive aspect of this. It is applying to all parts, either it is a smart devices or a smart robots or a smart technology, whatever you can pinpoint. And
I think that is absolutely true, actually. In fact, not only that, I think we have to create awareness, but also I think, as Sir Raj Reddy also mentioned, that there is this, it's really an issue of empowerment of the people. And, in the modern world, I think you need to empower digitally, and so that, they can become more productive. So I think this is absolutely, yeah. So Amit, you want to make another point?
Yes, so I think I was just saying that this digital device is not only in terms of regional level, but also in terms of the target population or target age group, whatever we are trying to address. So I think it's a global problem, and a good ecosystem can support it to bridge this gap as soon as possible. And last year we have also organized one of the international conferences, oldest international conference in robotics for the first time in India. That was also one of the motivation to bridge different communities together, create awareness that what is happening elsewhere and what are the positive aspects of emerging technologies, and how a collaborative ecosystem can be created to bridge any gap and to really push things together. So I think I will stop here. If you can
Thank you.
repeat
Thank you.
the question, I can tell
Yeah,
a little about that.
sure. So do we have any other question from the audience? If you have other questions.
Can I ask one question? When we
Yes,
talk
yes,
about
Dr. Patil. Yes.
various technological solutions to be provided in this AI-driven society, how can we make sure that they are interoperable?
Ma'am, I talked about, Chair, can I?
Yes, yes, yes. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I talked about, ma'am, about localization and democratization of AI. And there, what I was trying to actually talk about sharing databases, sharing data sets, and that should be very local to our country. Also, if you would recall, we have already worked with Dr. J. Satnarayan to work on digital service standards. So interoperability will happen only when we look at all kinds of standards and SOPs to ensure that the systems talk to each other. So democratization of AI spaces is very important.
If
Yes,
I
Saurabh,
may
yeah.
add on to that, moderator, sir, I think the point that everyone's made on a positive note, right, is that we've got the skills. And I think we're doing much better than competitor countries on skills. And inevitably, there is convergence on a lot of things, but there's divergence also. So this digital divide is an eternal challenge. But basic thing is power generation. If you don't have electricity, and if you don't have connectivity, if you don't got internet, high bandwidth connection, these AI services tradability between different regions within India or across the world is something that must be addressed. The other thing I'm thinking of is incentives being aligned. So things that where there's potential room for improvement is that for creativity and entrepreneurship. So when we look at startup India data, we don't see a diversity in various different sectors where in other countries one might see AI startups are emerging, AI investment from the private sector. If you look in terms of R&D productivity, number of AI papers, citations to AI papers, conference papers from India. So both on the startup innovation incentives and R&D productivity, there are, I think, local solutions required, which we can learn. Another point I'd like to mention is the use cases, which is specific local to India. So the next generation of AI will inevitably require this domain knowledge and heavy subsidization on billions of dollars on high performance computing. So how do we create a platform for these specific use cases at very local levels to incentivize the Indian talent pool to solve these mission critical challenges?
We already have OGT.gov.in, which is acting as a test bed and is helping us to have this kind of data. And I also feel it is not just about power, because when Professor Reddy talked about possibilities of mobile phone to each, it is actually about innovating a charger, which is, or a phone which doesn't rely on power as much, because our phone is our device now, the smartphone. And secondly, as I said, we should look at local models of generating power as in electricity. And we do have various, startups in IIT where I work with one. I did my PhD from IIT, where we were trying to do gobar gas power generation. So it's all about thinking different. It's not the conventional Western models will not work for India. And it is adding to what we already have. Like we already have OGT.gov.in, but how much of it is being used is a critical question. We already have working on NLP, TDIL, natural languages, and METI and NEGD. But how many of startups are using that? So my concern is, like Professor Reddy said, is more about cascading the information and awareness and building on to what we have rather than reinventing the wheel.
So one more question that we have is that how can India come up with a community similar to OpenAI? And so Shantanu, do you want to take up this question that how can we have something like OpenAI? And related question that I have and that has not been touched here is while we talked about community, we also need to talk about the challenges involved in security of data. So yeah, so Shantanu, you want to take up this?
Okay. Let's take it to the reverse order, the security of the data. So what happens, one of the beauty about anything that's technology driven is the technology in, am I audible? Yeah, okay, yeah. Technology sometimes creates a problem, and then there's enough backlash or enough incentive, as Saurabh spoke about incentive some time back, that enables other companies to come back with the technologies that sort of mitigates that. So for example, privacy. We have had in a couple of years back, lot of concerns about privacy on the open social media platforms. Privacy, the Cambridge Analytica was a big deal a couple of years back and so on. In just about that time, in 2018 or so, there were groups working in Google as well as MIT who are working on things like federated learning, distributed computing, and edge computing technologies that essentially enabled us to not only do some of the computings that happened, some of the data collection that happened that caused the problem, but enable the computing to get distributed on the edge in a privacy-preserved manner, which enabled for the cost of compute to go down and made more secure, right? So it became profitable enough. For example, take an example of the Google keyboard. It's actually easier for Google not to collect all the data that you type on your keyboard, trying to optimize a global model, but with the advent of a better phones and this distributed computing technologies and things like federated learning, it's cheaper for them to actually compute that on the edge and give you a better experience, right? So the privacy part is a combination of both legislation as well as new technologies driving technological solutions for the problem. So that's big. I'm less concerned about that today than I was 2 years back. The second is the OpenAI type of consortium. I think that's what I call is a best example of a consortium actually comes from India itself. A couple of years back, about 10 years back, we as a nation decided to build the identity platform Aadhaar, the transaction platform UPI, under Nandan Nilekani and few other Indian personalities. We actually built a public-private partnership and did a fabulous job. I mean, it's amazing to see today that if when I go to the US, it's paying for my purchase at a big store electronically is still a challenge. Outside my office in Gurgaon at Airtel, I can buy 2 bananas for 20 rupees and pay, right? So those technologies were developed not because government mandated it, because a private sector decided to do it. It was a public-private partnership. I think that's a model we should just emulate. How did you build Aadhaar? How did you build UPI? Just go back to that same drawing board. It's not that anyone has to teach us for the first time. We know how to do it. Just the will of the nation. As I said, the will at the top level of the leadership. And this is a forum where you can raise such requests, saying that, look, come back to us, government and private, as I said, public partner initiative. Take the same model of how you developed UPI and Aadhaar, and then we'll have a model for, quote unquote, the OpenAI for India. That's not necessarily the OpenAI model of the West, that not necessarily the close AI model of the China, but somewhere in between, that's India AI model for India.
Thank you. So we are just now reaching close of the session. So I will just give panelists to make one sentence remarks on what do they think about this topic, building platforms for the digital nomads. And if you can give your one-line comments. So I will just begin with Amit, your comment on your last comment on this final.
So I think in one line, what we can say is
you can take 2 lines. Last comments,
yeah.
because yeah. Yes.
When you say the word last, that is scary. So from my perspective, I think for digital nomads, as I mentioned, they basically need medium to do the things. If you will just put in a rough manner. So if we can empower them with more capable medium, they will be able to do things better, and perhaps the things which they might not be able to do with other mediums. So in that regard, with the smart devices are medium to make interaction or verbal interaction possible, but perhaps robot will be one of the medium for tele operation, and then they are already doing different things in different part of the world, and why not in India? We can achieve telemedicine, telehealthcare, teleeducation, all these things
Thank
with
you.
all that technology. So.
Thank you. So Dr. Charru, your last comment, final comment on this.
I personally, whenever I've worked in rural areas and technology, I've always kept talisman of Mahatma Gandhi, father of nation, in front of me, and that what has been driving force of my study. That would it make difference to the last person in the last street of my country? If I keep that in mind, I'm sure we will be able to balance the human side of AI with the evil side of humans, if I can say.
Thank you. That's, I think, interesting. So Saurabh, your final comments.
The famous last words. Last thing, I was thinking, this is a topic of national eminence, so we have to think about doubling down in terms of how we invest through public-private partnerships and keep a strong goal on the global leadership, and which has to inevitably be at the very highest level of comparative advantage, of how India could tackle. At the same time, we cannot lose sight of inclusion, and these technological changes don't impact inequality in India drastically, and keeping the human being at the center.
I think absolutely. I think Shantanu, your final comment.
Okay, one sentence, right?
Yes.
Yeah, India is a planet on its own, so let's do it the Indian way.
Thanks. Great. So Shaul Brera, your final comment.
Yes, if I had the opportunity to work with guys from IIT, from Stanford, and I was hoping for us to take a look at the video, but that wasn't the case. So you can see not just the art of the possible, but the art of the impossible, correct? And that's what kids, the next generation, needs to see. Not necessarily what we're doing now, but what we can do, in the future. And once you ignite that flame within that brain, correct? They're going to do not just the possible, but the impossible, to be able to come up with solutions such as the ones that they'll be able to see. Because I've seen the light come on. I've seen that many times, but you need to do that, correct? With actual use cases that mean something.
Absolutely. So I think with this positive note, we can end. But if Dr. Raj Reddy is there, he started this panel. And I would request, sir, if you're there, to sort of make a final concluding remarks.
It's not one whole sentence, it's two words: universal 5G. That is the basic thing that you need for all the rest of the stuff, especially for digital nomads.
I think you made a very important qualifier for 5G, the universal 5G. So
yeah,
I
if it is not available to everyone,
yes,
then you might as well not have it. And secondly, it should be universal in that it should be affordable.
yes.
Right now, the problem is companies like Airtel and so on say you can only use 1 G per day, or you can't have any limit. I don't know how much I'll use. Especially once we have entertainment where we can watch any movie in any language. All of a sudden, everybody will watch, need 100 GB.
Yes. So thank you very much, all the panelists. I will end this with this note that our session was for building platform for digital nomads, and Dr. Raj Reddy has ended that by this, by universal affordable 5G, and that will indeed build to the platform for the digital nomads with all the stuff like India AI, and reaching out to the common masses in the rural areas with tele-robotics and coupled with measurements done with huge, humongous data that will be available in a size of like in India. We hope that we will usher in a new world. Thank you very much. I think it was a pleasure having you all on this panel. Thanks. I think over to Dr. Kavita.
Yeah. I take this opportunity to thank all the esteemed speakers for having such an informative and learning kind of an experience in this session. Last but not the least, I also thank all the participants who have joined virtually to make this session a very successful session. Thank you all once again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Inviting us. And thanks, wonderful chair.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Let's go.